when y'all go home and you're talking to your buddies and they say, he wants to take my gun away. You've heard it here. I'm on television, so everybody knows it. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in people's lawful right to bear arms. I will not take your shotgun away. I will not take your rifle away. I won't take your handgun away.
New York Times best-selling author, Fox News contributor, author of More Guns, Less Crime, now the 3rd edition. John, a lot to talk about with you today. First off, let's start with your new book.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of things that Obama has done permanent damage to our country, but there are other things I think we can still try to fix things. And it's everything from the issue of guns, where he's impacting people's ability to go and defend themselves, to the quality of health care, where I think a lot of the damage that he's already done there is permanent, to the economy, where we're going to be having debates like we're just having now over the sequester and the debt ceiling limit, where he's claiming that if we even slow the rate of government, somehow that's going to be a disaster, despite the huge increases in government spending that we've already had. And I think the reverse is true. I think the reason why we've had slow growth is because of the huge spending increases and huge debt that we're piling up. And so I think in some areas there's things that we can do. But I have to say, just in the last few weeks, I've come across things that are related to what's at the Brink. I was in Colorado, and I've never heard of a White House before strong-arming state legislators to go and get them to go and vote for gun control bills. I was just in Colorado kind of at the beginning of my book tour, and being invited there by state legislators, both the Democrat and Republicans. And apparently, just a day or so before I got there, Joe Biden was calling up state legislators and saying that if they voted the right way on the gun control bills that were before the state legislature, the Obama administration would help them raise money and campaign next year. And if they voted the wrong way, they were going to face primary opposition. I mean, this is a type of very hardball politics that happens every once in a while for federal candidates with regard to the White House, but I've never heard them involving themselves in state House races before. And they were able to get 7 Democrats in the state House there to flip their positions, and it was enough to get 4 gun control bills through. And one of them essentially imposes a tax on people who buy guns. The Republicans had tried to put in an amendment that would allow it so that poor people wouldn't have to go and pay the taxes, but the Democrats have a majority in both the state House and the state Senate there, and in the vote in the state House, which has already taken place, they voted that down. The Democrats voted unanimously not to allow poor individuals to be exempt from that tax. I mean, it's so funny. I mean, any other exemption for lower-income people, they would rush to the door to do, but they doesn't seem to bother them that poor people are now going to be less able to go and buy guns for protection, even though my research shows it's basically poor individuals who live in high-crime urban areas who are the most likely victims of crime and who benefit the most from owning guns for protection.
John, let me ask you, what does that say about the agenda? Can I go as far as saying that we're looking at the very beginning of them wanting to is this a confiscation issue down the road?
The general thought for Obama is to go and make it more costly for people to own guns, so you'll see fewer guns owned, and as gun ownership goes down, it'll be easier for them 10 or 15 or 20 years from now to go and push for, maybe confiscation at that point. I think if you look at this broadly, this has been a general pattern that I think gun control advocates, they think decades ahead. So when they go arm in arm with animal rights activists to try to reduce hunting, one of the things they know is if you grew up in a family that hunted, you're a lot more likely to own guns than if you didn't. And so if they can go and make it more difficult, more costly for people to go and hunt, then there'll be fewer gun owners. It'll be easier for them to push their agenda that way. But I think the kind of tax that you have is just such a bold, simple way to go and reduce gun ownership. And the fact that they won't even allow an exemption for poor people just shows that it's really reduction in gun ownership that's their ultimate goal.
Right, that clarifies the agenda. Let me ask you this. Why? Why?
Well, I think, one of the things I talk about in At the Brink is the relationship that I had with Obama during the late 90s when we were both at the University of Chicago. I think he's a real believer in not allowing Americans to own guns. I've told you before on the air, I have additional conversations that are in the book, but the first time I met him, he told me that he didn't believe people should be able to own guns. And, there are lots of reasons why people have those types of views. I think the main reason for most people who believe that is they constantly hear about bad things that happen with guns on the news, virtually never hear about any of the benefits, and that affects them. But, I don't know exactly what's motivating Barack on this, or the president on this, but he's surely a true believer. And I think now that he no longer has to face the threat of re-election, we're going to see the damage that he's going to do. And he can do it in many different ways. It's not the passage of these laws, but there are different executive orders that he's going to have. But I think even more importantly are the people who he's putting on the courts. And at the Brink, I try to go through and talk about some of the nominations that he's put forward,
right,
and people that he has put on the courts. It's not the Supreme Court nominees, but the two Supreme Court nominees, people that he's put on the Supreme Court, Kagan and Sotomayor, don't even believe that there's an individual right to self-defense, let alone individual right to self-defense with a gun. The Heller and McDonald decisions were 5-4 votes. You have one of those 5 who die or retire, and you're going to see a massive sea change.
Yeah, we're in big trouble at that point. John, hold on to that thought. We're getting ready to take a break. More with that when we come back. I want to stress the court appointments again and how vital it is. And we'll talk more with John Lott about his newest book, At the Brink, right after this. Powerful stuff. Stick around.
This segment of Armed American Radio is being brought to you by the Gun Owners of America, America's no-compromise gun lobby. Become a member today. Visit gunowners.org. Join them, folks. I did. Welcome back.
Welcome back indeed. Make sure you head over to supportsecondamendment.com, supportsecondamendment.com. We can see you clicking them in there one at a time. Please sign that petition. Put your name on the list. Your name is the petition. We're going to print hundreds of thousands of names in April and take it to Congress and let them know that we mean business. Welcome back. John Lott, New York Times best-selling author of More Guns, Less Crime, 3rd edition, and now At the Brink. John, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
John, I want to ask you this. I want to go back. During the break, I was having a conversation, and the topic that came up, we went back to this why thing. When I look at guys like Bloomberg, and it's so frustrating, and I wonder why does he care? What does he get out of if I smoke or if I want a 17-ounce soda, as he stands on the podium introducing 20 people who are going to stuff 72 hot dogs down their throat in 10 minutes? Why does Barack Obama, what does he get out of 100 million people who used firearms today peacefully? What is his ultimate, why? What is the ultimate goal here? And, of course, this conjures up conspiracy theorists down the road, doesn't it? That they want to do certain things. Can you dig into that a little deeper?
Well, it's kind of hard to figure out what's going on in somebody's mind. I'm somewhat reticent to try to guess on that. But, if you look at self-identified conservatives and liberals, the one issue that most distinguishes them isn't abortion, it isn't taxes, it's gun control. And I think a lot of it has to do with who do you trust. Do you trust only government to go and handle weapons, or do you think individuals can be trusted to go and do it? And look, my research finds that the police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. I don't think there's any doubt about that in my mind, but I think the police themselves understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occurred. And the question is, what do you advise people to do when they're having to confront criminals by themselves? One of the reasons why I wrote At the Brink is I think Obama's going to have a real legacy with regard to gun control, unfortunately, here. And so much of the discussion now only looks at the benefits from these different types of laws that he's pushing and not the cost. So I try to educate people a little bit, saying, look, everybody wants to go and keep guns away from criminals, but you have to spell out, like I do in the book, what are the costs from these things too, because we have to know what's the net effect if we're going to go and if we want to pass these. And you look at the most popular piece of legislation that he's trying to push, and that is the so-called universal background check.
Right.
There's two claims that he makes with regard to them. Both of them are completely false. The one claim is that 1.7 million prohibited persons have been prevented from buying guns because of the Brady Act. And the other one is that 40% of gun sales take place without background checks. And both are false. And it's pretty easy, as I explain in the book, to go through and talk about. So, for example, if you look at the 1.7 million number, what the correct terminology is 1.7 million initial denials. Initial denials is dramatically different than saying prohibited people prevented. An easy illustration of that is look at the late Senator Ted Kennedy. He was on the no-fly list 5 times. So that means he had initial denials for flying, you could say, 5 times. He later flew. He wasn't able to go on the plane that he wanted to go on, but he wasn't permanently stopped. Would it make any sense to go and say that 5 times we stopped a terrorist from flying? I mean, he had a name that was similar to somebody that they wanted to stop, but that's a lot different than saying that bad guy was the guy who was actually trying to get on the plane.
Exactly.
But what they do is that terminology of saying 5 times we stopped a terrorist, even though nobody would use that in Kennedy's case, that's exactly the way we use it when we're talking about these initial denials, because 95% of these initial denials are false positives. They're people who have been stopped from buying guns who shouldn't have been stopped, just like Ted Kennedy shouldn't have been stopped, and there are real costs to that, months of delays. Now, we can go and say that maybe for the vast majority of these people it's an inconvenience, it's something they can live with, but what I point out in At the Brink is that you have a small group of people, small but significant group of people, who by these delays, they weren't able to defend themselves. And so you have a small group of people who may be stalked or threatened in some way, who need to go and get a gun quickly for self-defense, but because of these mistakes in the background check system, they were denied that, and it has serious consequences for their safety. And that's just not the end of the problem. There's another number that's about 5 to 7 times larger than that, which deals with people who are delayed for, let's say, 3 days. But my research shows that even a 3-day delay has a small effect. I'm not going to say it's large, but you see about a 2% increase in rape rates and about a 2% increase in aggravated assaults against women. So the net effect, you can say, well, there are benefits from waiting periods or whatever, but even short ones, the net effect is actually to endanger people's safety. There's more people, particularly women, who may be stalked and need to get protection quickly. They can try to get a restraining order, but there are obvious limits to what benefit a restraining order can go and do for you. And so these delays impact negatively people's safety, and that's the point I'm trying to get out at the Brink with this debate that's going on right now, to make people realize and hopefully educate people a little bit so that your listeners, when they're talking to other people on this, when they're having debate what seems to be the popular issues that are being put forward, they can say, look, fine, we want to keep criminals from getting guns, but do you realize how badly the current system's operating? Do you realize the cost? And if you want to go and throw in millions more names into the system for this mental illness type considerations, which even the proponents say, just a fraction of 1% are actually dangerous individuals there, do you realize how many more false positives you're going to be creating, that the likelihood that your name is going to match somebody else's name now who is prohibited is going to go up. And so there are going to be more people who need to get a gun quickly for self-defense who are going to be stopped. And I'm not saying you necessarily don't want to do these things, but you need to understand the trade-offs and be able to explain that to others.
Yeah, and that comes back, for example, on a conditional response from the ATF on the 4473 form that says hold. Of course, then there's a 3-day that if the ATF doesn't respond, the gun can then be sold. So they're not looking at those numbers is what you're referring to, and they're not seeing the end. Well, that begs the following question then. Again, I have to go back to why. There's clearly dishonesty here. that because Barack Obama and the administration clearly know what you're saying. And I want to dig into that even further with you. It's fascinating, and it gets right down to the core, ladies and gentlemen, as to why is this happening and what is the ultimate goal. As John said, he can't get in his head, neither can you, but you can. If it walks and acts like a duck. You had alluded in the first segment that you had a conversation with Barack Obama back in Chicago many years ago when the two of you were at the University of Chicago, and he specifically said what to you? He said you were the gun guy, right?
Right. Well, I went up, I introduced myself. He said, "Oh, you're the gun guy?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." And he said then that, "I don't believe people should be able to own guns." And I have to confess, I was a little startled. I mean, I've been around a lot of left-wing academics, but he's the only one I ever remember in academia that just came out so boldly and just say flat out that people shouldn't be able to own guns. And I had heard that he'd been working with the city of Chicago in their suit against the gun makers, and I had heard that he was on the board of the Joyce Foundation board of directors. Right. There's the largest funder of anti-gun groups like the Violence Policy Center and other places like that around the country. And I said, well, maybe we can get together for lunch sometime and talk about it. And he just wrinkled his face, turned his back on me, and walked away. And that was the end of our first conversation. It's pretty much the way our other conversations went. He refused to shake hands with me. He turned his back on me when I tried to talk to him on multiple occasions. It wasn't just that he just disagreed with me. It was that I got the strong feeling that because I supported letting people be able to defend themselves with guns when the police weren't there to do it, that he viewed me as evil in some sense. Look, being a conservative in academia, I frequently run into people who disagreed with me. That was normally the case, but usually most academics would at least argue with you about things.
Right.
Barack, over and over again, as I give examples in the book, that wasn't his attitude. His attitude was he wasn't going to shake my hand. He was going to turn his back on me. Even when I was trying to be helpful, there's one story that I give where the only academic seminar, I remember him showing up to in the 4 years that we overlapped, because I think he was pretty much campaigning all the time when he wasn't doing his 3 hours a week of teaching.
I got to laugh on that, which I'm sorry.
What?
We're laughing in the studio here when you said that, the campaigning. Everybody believes that he's in constant campaign mode. That was a classic.
Well, he's been constant campaigning forever.
Right.
So it just, anyway, I went up to him after the seminar because it was a lunchtime faculty seminar and there was food there, and he was waiting in line to get some food. And so I was next to him, and I said, I thought it was an interesting question, but I thought maybe it could have been clearer. And I started to explain to him how maybe the question might have been asked a little bit differently. And he just looked at me and then turned his back on me, right, kind of middle of a sentence that I was making. I was just trying to be helpful to the guy. And but it was clear that he just disliked me so much because of the gun stuff that he wasn't even going to let me try to be helpful to him.
So he hates guns so much that he doesn't even want to get to know you, doesn't want to have a conversation with you, an intelligent conversation with you, isn't interested in anything you have to say. And again, this begs a couple questions. How do we square with what you know to be the case? And I ask you that for a reason. I want listeners, we have new listeners across the country, and I want them to understand what it is we're up against. This is our president that you're talking about, and clearly you know what we're up against. So how do we square comments with, I support the Second Amendment, I support the right? How do we square that?
Look, even during the 2008 campaign, you'll find, so for example, when they had the so-called Potomac primary where Maryland, D.C., and Virginia were voting in the Democratic primary, Obama was on local TV then saying that he supported D.C.'s gun ban. Just a few months later, when the Supreme Court decision strikes down D.C.'s handgun ban and gun lock laws, he's on the national TV then saying, look, they're just confirming my position all along. This is what I've always believed. And he said something completely the opposite just a few months earlier.
Right.
But, the media wasn't really interested in saying, is this consistent or not, or they obviously he knew what people wanted to hear on that issue, and he told them. But and people who felt the other way, he would quietly tell them the opposite, just to kind of target his different audiences that were there. But I believe what he told the people before the primaries in D.C. and the neighboring states. That much more accurately reflected what he actually believed, and that's what I tried pointing out at the Brink. I think that he's going to do real damage to people's ability to go and defend themselves. And the important thing here is that in some states where you have complete Democratic control of the legislature and the governorship, we're likely to have very bad laws go into effect that are going to make it hard for people to own guns.
Well, we're seeing that right now. We're seeing that in New York. We're seeing it in California. We're seeing it clearly in Oregon, Maryland, Colorado, Minnesota,
Well,
DC.
I mean, there's a number of states. I mean, you just went through the list of them, and even Hawaii, which already has strict gun control laws. And one of the things that's true about these things with the registration, the licensing, and the fees, we talked about the fees in Colorado that they're trying to impose.
Right.
These things, I think, are more aimed at reducing gun ownership than anything else.
Well, let's go to Chicago for just a second. We know Chicago's history of gun control. We know their recent history with murder. Christy Hefner made some of the most boneheaded statements I think I've ever heard anyone make a few weeks back when she alluded to gun violence and global warming and it being warmer. And, of course, I was bringing the show live from Tampa, Florida, who up until February 5th, when I did the math and checked with the police department, had yet to record its first murder. And we all know it's consistently warmer in Tampa, Florida than it is in Chicago at 27 degrees when she made that idiotic statement. Had already recorded, John, its 40th murder on the 28th of January. Now, this is their model? Is this what they're trying to give us? Clearly, there's an agenda here. They can't point to Chicago with any semblance of hope and say, look, it's working here, because it isn't working there.
We know the places that have banned guns, time after time, every time, we see increases in murder rates. I just finished recently looking at the impact in Massachusetts of the gun registration program that they have there in licensing. In 1998, there were about 1.5 million people in Massachusetts that owned guns. Today, it's a little bit over 200,000. That's an amazing drop that they've been able to use licensing and registration, because you have to get permission. This isn't for concealed carry.
Right.
This is just to own a gun in your home. In a lot of places in Massachusetts, the police chief or the sheriff will not let you own a gun in your home.
Listen to what you just said, though. But that drop in gun ownership is huge, and this is proof that the difficulty, and this is what we're going to see for decades to come. This is what Barack Obama's agenda is leading to. Ladies and gentlemen, more with John Lott when we come back right after this here on the Armed American Radio Network. And I want to apologize, John. Well, first of all, welcome back. I want to apologize for having to cut you off at the breaks when I know you probably can't hear the music, and I'm sorry to have to do that, but that computer is going to cut us off I get hate mail when that happens when you're on, John.
Okay, well, I am glad that people want to hear what I have to say. That's very nice of them.
They definitely do. Believe me, I'll forward you some of it. You'll get a kick out of it. Ladies and gentlemen, we were talking with John about his new book, At the Brink. And, John, I've bought the book. I have not had an opportunity to read it with my travel schedule this weekend yet, At the Brink. I read a story about a woman who returns more than $11,000 cash that fell out of an armored truck. And there was a couple things in the story that struck me as very dangerous, because we're seeing this from a political perspective in this country, this mentality, this give me, take mentality. And I quote here, a few of her friends suggested she should have kept the money that fell out of the Brinks truck because she is deserving and could really use the money.
I mean, that's disappointing. I mean, I guess I'm not too surprised or shocked by any of that, but I think if we could get the economy to grow, there would be a lot less feeling of that. People feel really hit hard over the last 5 years or so. And unfortunately, what we're finding is that the only reason why unemployment rate's basically going down is because people are giving up looking for work. There's two reasons why unemployment can fall. Either you give people jobs, or they're only defined as unemployed as long as they're actively searching for work. And at some point, a lot of these people, most of them, have just given up looking for work. And that explains about two-thirds of the drop in unemployment rate over the last few years. That's not the way you really want to go and get unemployment to be reduced. We've had, virtually no income growth, and, when income's not rising and you have fewer people working than you did before, families are going to be hurting a lot. And how do we correlate that with crime? Gun ownership is at record highs.
unemployment. How can you correlate? Are you seeing any correlation between all of this?
Well, I don't ever think that there's been a big impact on unemployment, on crime rates. You know, the big things that affect it are things that make it more costly to go and do the crime, things like higher arrest rates or higher conviction rates or longer prison sentences or the death penalty. Those are the types of things that I think academic evidence consistently shows matters a lot. You know, or in the case of guns, the fact that would-be victims might be able to defend themselves when the police can't be there to go and protect you. Those are the types of things that matter the most. I think income and poverty, those have very small effects on crime rates.
All right, let's go to New York for just a second. Of course, New York was the first state to pass some very draconian gun laws. Now, they already had a 10-limit magazine capacity in New York. They've lowered that to 7. John, what do you expect to happen with all the research that you've done? Can you give us any indication of what you think might happen in New York going forward? Let's say this legislation stays in place. It's unchallenged. In 2 to 3 years, anything?
Well, I don't think it can produce any benefits. Look, we've been down this road before with a 10-limit ban nationally, and it didn't have any beneficial impact. There's lots of academic studies. True, that was kind of grandfathered in. But after 10 years, magazines wear out, springs, decay, and you would imagine if there was some benefit, there should have at least been some beneficial impact as the years went along. But there are lots of people who've looked at that, and they haven't found that type of effect, even studies that were funded by the Clinton administration. So, and people have looked at individual state laws, too, and again, they don't find benefits in those cases either. You know, at some point you would think that would matter, and I think that's the reason why you're not going to see federal legislation passed. And we've been there and done that on both of those two things. I think the federal legislation that we have to worry about passing is the one that I was talking about earlier with regard to at the Brink, and that was these so-called universal background checks. That's the one I think I'm most worried about passing. I just think it's too heavy of a lift, given that we've already tried these types of laws nationally, unless you had kind of really die-hard Democrats controlling everything to get that passed otherwise.
Do you expect anything else to pass? I mean, are you...
Well, I think that my guess is if something passes, it's going to be these so-called universal background checks.
The background check, okay.
And, I think it could have, and I am concerned. I think something like that could pass. I guess right now I'm convinced that we're going to have a lot of states pass laws.
Right.
There are going to be a lot of really bad laws, and they're going to do things that the primary impact of it is that it's going to make it harder for people to own guns. You're going to have fewer people that are going to be able to defend themselves. And the reason why it's being done is try to make clear, and at the Brink, it's just to make it easier for them to go and pass other gun control laws in the future.
John, where can people get your book, At the Brink? We're going to run out of time here in a few minutes, on which you have plenty of time.
Well, I mean, it's available on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com, or it's available in bookstores. I mean, I think it's one of my most important books, and I hope people find it useful. I just think that there's some things Obama's done permanent damage to us with regard to, things like health care. There are other things that he's done a lot of damage, but I think things are still fixable, and that is with the economy. And there are things that he's threatening us, such as gun ownership, making it hard for people to go and be able to defend themselves. And the reason why I wrote the book was hopefully to give people the facts and information that they need to not only convince their friends. I think I have some fairly dramatic graphs in the book that I think could make a real difference if people see them on these different issues. And but also give them the courage to go and make sure that their legislators stand firm on this. As you say, there's only 13 votes in the House or so, and we have to make sure that they stand firm on these issues.
John Lott.
That's the reason why I wrote the book, is to give people, some steel in their spine on them.
This is time to have your eyes open, believe me. Very sobering stuff from John Lott. Thanks for being here, John.